election or after, we've seen Republicans at the state level move to change voting laws in the wake of the 2020 election. And undergirding all of this is the former President Trump, continuing to make fraudulent, baseless claims about the election, and that's really fueling the base of the party to push forward with election reforms at the state level. And according to our own polling, CBS polling, about 70% of Republicans say that Biden did not legitimately win the election. So those are kind of the dynamics on the Republican side, but they also are opposed to this from a policy level. And Democrats, meanwhile, say that this is why this kind of legislation is needed, that the baseline needs to be established for voter protections. However, they've come under some criticism as well, including from some local officials across the country who say that some of these deadlines and targets and timelines are just really burdensome for local officials. So Democrats moved some amendments today, or tried to address some of those concerns. But there's also this bigger challenge facing Democrats, which is that they are not all united on this bill. I mean, today's markup really showed that they're not going to get any Republican support for this, but they also haven't shored up the Democrats on this as well. Joe Manchin, of course, remains the single outlier on this bill. He said he is not yet supportive of it and is concerned about a partisan election bill being put forth. And this is why you've seen a lot of activists try to push to reform Senate rules to be able to pass this kind of bill. But again, support for filibuster reform is also elusive on Capitol Hill, with Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona also opposing it. So while this bill may make it out of the markup, may make it out of committee, it still faces a very uphill climb here in the Senate and raises questions about how Democrats need to strategize next and perhaps have a more targeted approach to these voting issues.
Natasha, back on infrastructure for a moment. If the White House compromises with Republicans on infrastructure, do we have an idea of what is on the chopping block potentially?
Well, what the White House has said is that they're, behind the scenes, they're saying they're really focusing this aspect of the negotiations on hard infrastructure. Now, of course, there's this whole other part of the bigger, more massive infrastructure plan that Biden wants, and that includes the so-called soft infrastructure, the child care, some of the elder care, education-related, benefits and so forth, that the White House is recognizing Republicans are not going to sign on to that. So they are looking at this as that is a separate negotiation. So far, they don't see a lot as on the chopping block because they're looking at this as two separate. They're separating the two. One, hard infrastructure to do with Republicans. The other part, they might have to do through, likely would have to do through reconciliation. And I think that's why you're seeing the White House bring in Joe Manchin and bring in Kyrsten Sinema right now. They're trying to get them signed on early on to this bipartisan infrastructure bill. If that falls apart with Republicans, then they can come back and say, look, we did everything we can. We need you now. We need to work with progressives, and we need to get this across the goal line for the more larger, the families plan and the jobs plan is really the two different infrastructure, bills or packages that they're talking about. But really, the White House recognizes what they're working with Republicans, and they know it's a no-go if they try to go anywhere. They might do some negotiations on this infrastructure bill and say, hey, well, how about lead pipes? Can we talk about that? How about electrical grids? Can we talk about that? And try to expand it some. But they really know that this whole care economy that they've been talking about, some of these other benefits in the families plan, that's going to have to most likely be Democrats only.
Mariana, I want to ask you about the story that we've continued to cover here on Red and Blue for several days now. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy made public what he said on a hot mic days earlier. He wants Congresswoman Liz Cheney gone from her leadership post. Now, she won a resounding majority in a secret vote just 2 months ago. What do her prospects look like now, and what are you hearing from people there on Capitol Hill?
Well, Elaine, there's no saving Liz Cheney at this point. Of course, this vote is going to happen tomorrow. It is also going to be a closed vote, so we won't know exactly which Republicans voted in which way. But what we do know is that a majority of the caucus is no longer backing her. We've heard from some members who did end up voting to keep her in leadership actually now say they're not going to do that. One of them actually being one of the 10 Republicans who did vote to impeach Trump. It's Congressman John Katko from New York. He's going to be backing fellow New Yorker Elise Stefanik, who is likely to be replacing Cheney, potentially in a vote that could happen as early as tomorrow, but also as late as next week. But all signs point to her not going to be able to stay as the third-ranking, the highest-ranking Republican in the House caucus. And it's really coming at a time, it's really a data point, is how I like to describe it, as we discuss where the Republican Party is in this post-Trump era. It is very pro-Trump. And Cheney, for her part, has really just been discussing and wanting to amplify the fact that, yes, I acknowledge what a lot of the Republicans in the caucus are saying, which is that Trump was able to bring in new voters, working class, blue collars, with his populist appeal. But it's also worth acknowledging and trying to understand that Trump also sidelined a number of voters, including suburban women, independents, educated voters, and they don't necessarily have a home right now. So her argument really is, if we want to win nationally again and potentially future Republican president, we need to talk about this. Republicans, of course, are framing this as, well, she's focusing on the past. We don't want to relitigate the election conversation or what led to the insurrection. We need to look forward. So that's really the signal that they're going to send when they are going to vote her out tomorrow.
Yeah, you know, Mariana, though, help us understand here. You mentioned Representative Katko, for instance. So he is not somebody who subscribes to former President Trump's baseless notions of widespread election fraud, and yet he is not standing by, if I heard you correctly, Liz Cheney at this point. Help us understand the dynamic. What is it that Republicans like him are saying to explain why they're not continuing to support Congresswoman Cheney at this point?
Yeah, it's been very interesting talking to a number of those Republicans who did vote to impeach Trump to just get a sense of where they are. And one of the biggest takeaways is the fact that, yeah, they do feel in some ways demoralized that the person who is in this leadership position, who has been vocal and just bringing up these notions about Trump, will be ousted for just being able to speak out. But, however, they do say that they agree with a lot of the majority of the Republicans who call this a distraction, because they, for their part, could be doing the same thing, right? They did vote to impeach Trump. They could be condemning him, but they see it more as a strategic time and place to do that. They see what Cheney has done, and constantly, even any time that Trump puts out a statement nowadays, she has to rebuke that. They do see that as a distraction in terms of the overall messaging and how to get to winning back the majority in 2022. But they also are at a crossroads. They're very much analyzing what their own role is, how outspoken they can be. But it's interesting about these 10 Republicans who did vote to impeach. They don't regret that vote. And in town halls, and even if you ask them, it's going to be actually great to see them back in town so we can ask them these questions. How vocal are they going to be? Are they going to continue to take Cheney's lead? Because she has very much said she's not going to stay quiet, even if she is a rank-and-file member of the caucus.
So, Caitlin, with that as our backdrop, what impact is all of this having on the Republican Party more broadly, then?
That's right. Well, this is an issue happening on the House side. We're over here on the Senate side, and senators are being asked about this as well. Earlier today, John Thune, a member of the Republican leadership here on the Senate, right behind us, was asked about, how can you have a unified party with all of this going on in the House, and also at the same time that former President Trump continues to put out statements about the election. I mean, every week he's putting out statements trying to relitigate the election. Thune's argument was that relitigating 2020 is not a winning issue for Republicans if they want to gain seats in the House and Senate to be able to govern after the 22 midterms. But you have the former president, who is the highest profile member of the party, continuing to push forward these claims, and you're seeing those claims resonate with the base of the party. So this is what these lawmakers are having to kind of juggle. On one hand, they want to say that, look, we're going to be focused on pushing back against the Biden administration. We're going to be focused on pushing forward our views for governing. But they have Trump pushing forward these messages. They have Republicans at the state level pushing forward legislation that is aligned with these messages from the former president. Of course, in Arizona right now, you have an audit underway that was not sanctioned by election officials to, again, relitigate the 2020 election. So as much as this is a party that says that they want to move forward, there is this still embrace of Trump and his supporters that, will continue. And that's a question after this vote tomorrow about Liz Cheney, is what kind of role does she have and what kind of role can she have moving forward, and kind of how does the party actually move forward after this? Can they, if the former president continues to weigh in every day?
So many open questions. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Mariana Sotomayor, and Natasha Korecki, thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. Millions more Americans are now eligible to receive Pfizer's COVID vaccine.
The FDA says kids as young as 12 can get the Pfizer vaccine. I'm Skyler Henry at the White House, where despite the breakthrough, the Biden administration is working to convince more Americans to get vaccinated.
Plus, a cyber attack on a major pipeline is already causing long lines at gas stations along the East Coast. Colonial Pipeline says it'll have the situation sorted out by the weekend. What we know about who may be behind it next.
It's a good time for people like us. Everything's starting up.
This is not just another streaming app.
You might want to hold on to something.
This is a mountain of original, bingeable entertainment.
It's just the beginning. The world is now a blank page.
That's why we're here, to save each other.
This is chilling, unsettling, and brilliantly bonkers.
Oh, shh.
This is weird and hilarious, stylish and cheeky.
I imagine she dreams of casting me aside like an old shoe.
Oh, honey, you know I'd never throw away a shoe.
This is a joy to watch, a wonder to explore, and a peak TV experience.
We are such stuff as dreams are made of.
I'm so happy! Yay!
Live sports, breaking news, and a mountain of entertainment. Paramount Plus, now streaming.
Football, soccer, whatever you want to call it, it's huge. It's the best and biggest competition.
You have a golden opportunity now or never. Oh, yes!
Oh, they done it!
Unbelievable!
It's not over yet.
The UEFA Champions League. Stream every match live on Paramount Plus.
Let's get this party started.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Paramount Plus. Woo! This is strokes of genius, beautiful games, and one shining moment. This is Defenders, Investigators, and
7 strangers picked to live in a house.
This is young SpongeBob, young Sheldon, and younger. This is everything you've been looking for.
That's gonna leave a mark.
Live sports, breaking news, and a mountain of entertainment.
All right.
This is Paramount Plus, now streaming.
Whose stories are worth telling? Who's worth hearing? Never let anyone decide that for you.
This is not just another streaming app. This is love taps, death traps, and whip snaps.
Oh, shh.
This is things that go boom and things that go
Boom.
This is justice. This is fearless.
This is business.
This is all the drama you can handle.
You must go. Make your stand.
Live sports, breaking news, and a mountain of entertainment. Paramount Plus, now streaming.
That bird has been staring at me. It's been there for 10 minutes. Okay.
I didn't know we were coming, or I had worn pants.
You changed the rules, sir.
Oh, objection, Your Honor.
That's intense.
Yeah, welcome.
Are you ready, Counselor? I am, Your Honor.
The Biden administration says it expects a major U.S. pipeline to be up and running by the weekend after a large-scale ransomware attack. The Colonial pipeline is responsible for nearly half of the East Coast's fuel supply. It shut down Friday. The FBI says the hack was carried out by a cyber criminal group known as DarkSide. Now the Biden administration is taking action to assess the damage and prevent further disruptions.
We are bringing our all-of-government effort at the president's direction to not only address the situation that is upon us today, that is galvanizing our attention, of course, but to really focus on critical infrastructure and what we can do to strengthen that critical infrastructure across our government and to make it more resilient to these types of attacks and to raise awareness so that everyone understands the need to prevent and be in a position to respond to these attacks.
It's just the latest in a series of high-profile hacks targeting the U.S. Elise Preston has more on the implications for Americans.
As the Colonial pipeline shutdown entered another day, drivers along part of the East Coast felt the pinch.
It's been crazy. This is worse than a hurricane.
Danielle Charles and her daughter spent about an hour searching for gas in Florida before they were able to fill up.
4 gas stations we passed by, and they're all crowded up with cars.
In North Carolina, some drivers dealt with lines stretching for miles, and the governor declared a state of emergency.
You don't want to miss out. You don't want to be the one that doesn't get gas.
Colonial, which delivers 45% of fuel consumed on the East Coast, was forced to shut down operations after a group of hackers called DarkSide broke into its computer system as part of a ransomware attack. AAA says Americans shouldn't start panic buying gasoline. They should try to conserve gas by combining errands into one trip or using more fuel-efficient vehicles.
Gas station owners are and should act responsibly. We will have no tolerance for price gouging.
The White House is monitoring the situation, and President Biden plans to speak to Russian President Vladimir Putin about the cyber attack.
So far, there is no evidence based on from our intelligence people that Russia is involved, although there is evidence that the actor's ransomware is in Russia.
The shutdown is also putting airports on the East Coast at risk of low supply. American Airlines had to adjust 2 long-haul flights out of Charlotte. Colonial Pipeline hopes to reopen the line later this week, but cautions supply shortages are possible in the short term. Michael George, CBS News, New York.
CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis joins me now for more. Hi there, Olivia. So the Colonial pipeline is the latest in a series of high-profile hacks. Secretary Mayorkas says the administration is addressing it. Do we know how?
Right. Elaine, today administration officials outlined what was underway in the immediate term, medium term, and long term. The energy secretary said that the pipeline should be substantially operational by the end of this week and over the weekend, but that in the meantime, the EPA had issued a waiver to several states to allow them to use non-compliant fuel in order to up the fuel supply in the short term. She said that the government was enlisting railroads to help transport fuel if that became necessary. Of supply, she said that this was a temporary crunch, but not a fuel shortage, so that people did not have to feel the need to go hoarding fuel, and gas stations should not be price gouging for it. As you mentioned, the Secretary of Homeland Security said in the medium term, his agency was going to be surveying critical infrastructure to make sure that they shored up any weak links in other infrastructure that might be exploited. And then more broadly, the administration has been foreshadowing for weeks now a broad executive order meant to shore up the country's cybersecurity defenses. Based on what we know about it now, it's not clear that it would have prevented an incident like this one in Colonial. So some big fixes still do seem to be elusive from the government's perspective.
Well, in the meantime, Olivia, we have learned that a group targeting the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department has released officers' personal information, like psychological evaluations and credit histories. How are these attacks evolving?
Ransomware is a huge problem, Elaine, and it's getting bigger. The former CISA director, Chris Krebs, recently told Congress that we are on the cusp of a pandemic, not a health pandemic, but a pandemic of digital incidents like these, where criminal enterprises get savvier and more sophisticated and are able to better target their attacks. It makes sense that when hackers get more money, they can afford to wage bigger and better and more sophisticated incursions. We already see evidence of that in the evolution of how some ransomware works. Normally, when you think of ransomware, people associate it with hackers coming in, taking a bunch of data, encrypting it, and saying, give us X amount of dollars or Bitcoin, or you won't see it again. Increasingly, these attacks are now like the one that you just described. They coincide with threats of document dumps and going public with sensitive or proprietary or embarrassing information. So even if a company has taken steps to lock up and back up its sensitive data, if it doesn't want it out in the public to begin with, these ransomware attacks are just as effective. They're not a new problem, but they're a growing one. And this incident with Colonial and with the police department illustrates just how vulnerable some systems and entities continue to be and how hard good solutions are to come by.
Olivia, you mentioned document dumps. DarkSide has dumped stolen data from companies that did not pay a ransom in the past. Do we know if Colonial has made any ransom payments?
We don't currently know that, Elaine, and we may never know for sure whether it does wind up paying a ransom unless the company itself chooses to disclose that information. Or, of course, if something happens and that indicates that a ransom wasn't paid, i.e. sensitive information gets poured out into the public sphere. The Biden administration on this front has said that it doesn't offer advice in one way or the other, that this is a purely private sector decision. In the past, the FBI has said that it does not support paying ransoms because, again, successful ransomware attacks beget successful ransomware attacks. But officials have acknowledged that a lot of entities that are targeted wind up paying because they literally can't afford not to. One thing we know about Colonial is that it's one of just many incidents to otherwise go it is one of many incidents that otherwise go undisclosed or unreported. These attacks strike much less prominent targets like schools, like hospitals, like local governments all the time. Probably safe to say on a near daily basis. And what these targets don't know and aren't told is whether to pay those ransoms. And we understand that most of them do because they just don't see that they have any other choice.
It's so sobering, Olivia, to hear these details that a lot of people, I think, are just beginning to learn about, and the need to harden defenses. It's something I know you'll continue to follow closely. Olivia Gaz is for us. Olivia, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elaine.
According to the CDC, 46% of Americans have received at least one dose of the coronavirus vaccine. President Biden says he hopes to raise that number to 70% by July. Skylar Henry has the latest from the White House.
Journalists weren't allowed in the room as President Biden met virtually with a bipartisan group of state governors to discuss vaccination efforts.
I am optimistic. I think we're going to see in the next 3 or 4 years the ability to provide access to and uptake of significant additional health care initiatives.
The Biden administration announced new programs to help get more Americans their COVID shots, including free Uber and Lyft rides to vaccination sites, community college vaccine clinics targeting students, and more funding for community outreach.
The president's meeting comes a day after the FDA expanded emergency use authorization for Pfizer's vaccine for Americans 12 to 15 years old, which the drug maker says is 100% effective in that age group.
A CDC advisory board will review the data and finalize guidance Wednesday.
Parents who want to protect their children, younger teens who want to get vaccinated, we're a step closer to that goal now.
But as the country prepares to begin vaccinating 17 million more young Americans, over on Capitol Hill, the CDC director faced tough questions about our agency's strict summer camp guidance.
The camp guidance is intended to get our kids to camp and allow them to stay there.
The CDC currently requires mask wearing and maintaining 6 feet distance at all times, even while outdoors, regardless of vaccination status. Skylar Henry, CBS News, the White House.
A growing number of Republican-led states are ending increased unemployment benefits. At least 5 states say they will exit the federal program by the end of June. They say the move is to help business owners who cannot find staff. Friday's jobs report showed the economy added far fewer jobs than expected in April. President Biden says increased benefits are not why people aren't going back to work. President Biden wants a police overhaul package on his desk in the next 2 weeks. When we come back, why Democrats are up against the clock to get their legislative priorities through and the obstacles they face in getting them done. You're streaming Red and Blue.
It's a good time for people like us. Everything's starting up.
This is not just another streaming app.
You might want to hold on to something.
This is a mountain of original, bingeable entertainment.
It's just the beginning.
The world is now a blank page.
That's why we're here, to save each other.
This is chilling, unsettling, and brilliantly bonkers.
Oh, shh.
This is weird and hilarious, stylish and cheeky.
I imagine she dreams of casting me aside like an old Jew.
Oh, honey, you know I'd never throw away a shoe.
This is a joy to watch, a wonder to explore, and a peak TV experience.
We are such stuff as dreams are made of.
I'm so happy! Yay!
Live sports, breaking news, and a mountain of entertainment. Paramount Plus, now streaming.
Football, soccer, whatever you want to call it, it's huge. It's the best and biggest competition. You have a golden opportunity now or never. Oh, yes!
Oh, they done it!
Unbelievable!
It's not over yet.
The UEFA Champions League. Stream every match live on Paramount Plus.
Let's get this party started.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Paramount Plus. This is strokes of genius, beautiful games, and one shining moment. This is defenders, investigators, and
7 strangers picked to live in a house.
This is young SpongeBob, young Sheldon, and younger. This is everything you've been looking for. That's gonna leave a mark. Live sports, breaking news, and a mountain of entertainment.
All right.
This is Paramount Plus, now streaming.
Whose stories are worth telling? Who's worth hearing? Never let anyone decide that for you.
This is not just another streaming app. This is love taps, death traps, and whip snaps.
Oh, shh.
This is things that go boom and things that go
Boo.
This is justice. This is fearless.
This is business.
This is all the drama you can handle.
You must go. Make your stand.
Live sports, breaking news, and a mountain of entertainment. Paramount Plus, now streaming.
That bird has been staring at me. It's been there for 10 minutes.
Okay.
I didn't know we were coming or I wearing pants.
You changed the rules, sir.
Oh, objection, Your Honor. That's intense.
Yeah, welcome.
Are you ready, counselor? I am, Your Honor.
Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are getting closer to striking a deal on police reform. The bill could lead to a sweeping overhaul of the system across the U.S. Negotiations ramped up following Friday's indictment of 4 former Minneapolis police officers involved in the murder of George Floyd. Both parties have recently come to a compromise on several key issues. That includes eliminating the use of no-knock warrants and chokeholds during an arrest. However, there are still several issues to be addressed before the measure is passed. The Wall Street Journal recently explored Congress's ongoing efforts, reporting that there's some bipartisan agreement on key issues. Sadie Gurman co-wrote that piece, and she covers the Justice Department for the Wall Street Journal. Sadie, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. So after stalling in the final months of the Trump administration, discussions seemed to be gaining momentum. What changed, and where do negotiations currently stand?
Well, you had a couple of key events that brought this issue back up into the forefront. And the first was the state murder conviction of Derek Chauvin for killing George Floyd. That forced the issue back into the forefront on Capitol Hill. And then more recently, just a few weeks later, we had the indictments federally of 4 officers, including Derek Chauvin, in that same case. So that has sort of revived the issue. It is also nearing the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's death. That's May 25th. The president has urged Congress to act before then. And so all of these issues are sort of coming to the head at the same time.
I want to ask you more about that timeline in just a moment, but one point of contention has been what critics call the militarization of police departments, equipment designed for combat being repurposed for law enforcement. Does that seem likely to change?
Well, one of the key agreements, that has already been made is that the Defense Department would significantly limit, the kinds of cast-off military equipment that it gives to local police departments. Police departments had been using everything from armored vehicles to ballistic shields and other sort of weapons that had been previously used by the military. The bill, as it sits now, would significantly curtail that. It would essentially limit the Defense Department from providing those items to local departments, which is a significant measure because, like you said, there was a lot of criticism about the militarization of police and the presence of heavily armed officers at some of the recent protests and prior protests that sort of drew a public outcry about the use of this equipment. So that's a very significant issue that lawmakers are so far in agreement on. But like you said, there are other key measures that still need to be hashed out.
So qualified immunity is among them. And over the weekend, Democratic Majority Whip Jim Clyburn said he did not want the Democrats' push to eliminate qualified immunity to prevent this legislation from being passed. Remind us, what is qualified immunity, and do Democrats seem willing to set that aside?
Qualified immunity, like you mentioned, has been one of the greatest sticking points for lawmakers negotiating this bill. It is essentially, it protects individual police officers from lawsuits, in cases of misconduct or in use of force or shootings. Basically, you're sort of limited as a citizen in your ability to sue individual officers for their conduct. Instead, most people tend to sue the municipality or the city. And this is something that Republicans and Democrats just cannot agree upon. Democrats want to end qualified immunity, and Republicans want it to remain untouched. Police groups are certainly not budging in their, desire to see no changes to qualified immunity. But Democrats are pretty adamant that they want to make it easier for people to be able to, recoup damages in cases of police misconduct from individual officers. Representative Clyburn's comments today are the first sort of indication that we might be able to see some elements of this bill pass, even if the whole thing, that Democrats originally wanted, it can't be passed. So there was a very interesting sign, sort of a hopeful sign, since other Democrats have seemed not to want to budge on that issue.
You mentioned a moment ago the timeline here. President Biden is calling for Congress to pass police reform legislation before May 25th. And as you mentioned, that date marks 1 year since the murder of George Floyd. How likely, Sadie, is this timeline?
Well, that's just a couple of weeks away. And so, the people that we had talked to basically cautioned us that this was not final. There was certainly not an agreement, and, things could change at any time. So it is still pretty unlikely that they will meet that May 25th deadline. But it is significant progress. And, we could see some changes and certainly a greater conversation about this in the weeks ahead.
Well, on Friday, a federal grand jury indicted the 4 officers involved in the murder of George Floyd. The charges allege that the officers violated Mr. Floyd's constitutional and civil rights under Section 242 of Title 18, the deprivation of rights under color of law. Sadie, tell us more about that section of the U.S. Code and what role it plays in these negotiations.
That's a significant part of these negotiations, as a matter of fact. That statute requires federal prosecutors to meet a pretty high burden. It's called the willfulness standard in order to convict officers of things like excessive force and other civil rights violations. It is a high standard that has made prosecuting these types of cases in the past challenging for prosecutors. And what Democrats want is to lower that standard to recklessly or knowingly. And while that may seem like a minor distinction, when it comes to law enforcement, that is pretty significant. The Justice Department has actually discouraged Democrats from making any sort of sweeping changes to that 242 statute, and it has instead proposed its own set of more minor changes, sort of delineating different aspects of that statute. So that is another area where we are not likely to see agreement between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans have said they do not want to lower that standard. It is also a standard that's been upheld by the Supreme Court. So the significance of charges in that case is directly tied to sort of, where things stand in the police reform bill.
All right. And May 25th, that time frame you mentioned, just a couple of weeks away. Sadie Gurman. Sadie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The U.S. Postal Service says 1 in 5 pieces of mail was delivered late in the first quarter of 2021. The chief technology officer for the Postal Service says roughly 78% of first-class mail was delivered on time. That is down from over 92% the previous year. U.S. Postmaster Louis DeJoy says he believes service will improve by the end of 2021. Frustration with the Postal Service began in 2020. A surge of mail-in ballots combined with operational changes caused delivery to slow. A politically moderate congresswoman from upstate New York is poised to unseat her much more conservative peer in Republican leadership. How Elise Stefanik staked her political future on former President Trump and what it says about the party's future. You're streaming Red and Blue.
A good time for people like us. Everything's starting up.
This is not just another streaming app.
You might want to hold on to something.
This is a mountain of original, bingeable entertainment.
It's just the beginning.
The world is now a blank page.
That's why we're here, to save each other.
This is chilling, unsettling, and brilliantly bonkers. Oh, This is weird and hilarious, stylish and cheeky.
I imagine she dreams of casting me aside like an old Jew.
Oh, honey, you know I'd never throw away a shoe.
This is a joy to watch, a wonder to explore, and a peak TV experience.
We are such stuff as dreams are made of.
I'm so happy! Yay!
Live sports, breaking news, and a mountain of entertainment. Paramount Plus, now streaming.
Football, soccer, whatever you want to call it, it's huge. It's the best and biggest competition. You have a golden opportunity, now or never. Oh, yes!
Oh, they done it!
Unbelievable!
It's not over yet.
The UEFA Champions League. Stream every match live on Paramount Plus.
Let's get this party started.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Paramount Plus. This is strokes of genius, beautiful games, and one shining moment. This is defenders, investigators, and
7 strangers picked to live in a house.
This is young SpongeBob, young Sheldon, and younger. This is everything you've been looking for.
That's gonna leave a mark.
Live sports, breaking news, and a mountain of entertainment.
All right.
This is Paramount Plus, now streaming.
Whose stories are worth telling? Who's worth hearing? Never let anyone decide that for you.
This is not just another streaming app. This is love taps, death traps, and whip snaps.
Oh, shit.
This is things that go boom and things that go
boom.
This is justice. This is fearless.
This is business.
This is all the drama you can handle.
You must go. Make your stand.
Live sports, breaking news, and a mountain of entertainment. Paramount Plus, now streaming.
That bird has been staring at me. It's been there for 10 minutes.
Okay.
I didn't know we were coming, or I wearing pants.
You changed the rules, sir.
Oh, objection, Your Honor. That's intense.
Yeah, welcome.
Are you ready, Counselor?
I am, Your Honor.
Virginia Republicans have their nominee for the state's closely watched governor's race. Businessman Glenn Youngkin defeated 6 other candidates. He supports false claims the 2020 election was stolen. Former President Trump endorsed him Tuesday. Youngkin reportedly put $5.5 million of his own money into the campaign. Virginia's 2021 gubernatorial election will be held November 2nd. As the Republican leadership fight becomes increasingly public, we're taking a closer look at Congresswoman Liz Cheney's apparent successor for GOP conference chair. New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik is poised to be the number 3 Republican in the House, with the public support of Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. In 2014, she became the youngest female representative ever elected at age 30. Stefanik pulled off a rare feat, winning a district that twice voted for former President Obama. In 2016, she was slow to back then-candidate Trump for president. She declined to even say Mr. Trump's name and referred to him only as my party's nominee. So how did she go from that to this?
President Trump has fought tirelessly to deliver results for all Americans, despite the Democrats' baseless and illegal impeachment sham and the media's endless obsession with it. I was proud to lead the effort standing up for the Constitution, President Trump, and most importantly, the American people.
Philip Klinkner joins me now. He is a professor of government at Hamilton College in New York. Professor, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. So Georgetown University ranked Congresswoman Stefanik in the top 3% of most bipartisan members of Congress last session. So how did she become one of former President Trump's staunchest defenders?
Well, I think it's 2 things. One is her district shifted very heavily from Democratic to Republican. Obama won it by 6 points in 2012. Trump won it in 2016 by about 14 points. That's a 20-point swing, and that's huge. And any member of Congress is going to follow their district. And when it moves that fast, that far, they're going to move with it. The other thing is, I think it shows that the new Trump Republican Party really doesn't have much ideological content. It used to be that Republicans were about less government, lower taxes. They still say those things, but obviously the number one sort of litmus test in the Republican Party now is not about policy. It's about President Trump and whether you support him or not. And so I think it's really doesn't matter what your voting record is like, and she has a fairly moderate one for a Republican. It really matters what really matters is how strongly you support Donald Trump.
Nevertheless, Congressman Chip Roy from the conservative House Freedom Caucus has sent a letter to fellow Republicans criticizing Stefanik, saying in part, quote, "We must avoid putting in charge Republicans who campaign as Republicans, but then vote for and advance the Democrats' agenda once sworn in. That is, that we do not make the same mistakes that we did in 2017. So what do you make of that kind of criticism? Because in Chip Roy, you have someone who is also supportive of President Trump, now pointing to a record that he says does not comport with conservative values.
Well, I think Chip Roy's an interesting case. As you point out, he's very, very conservative on a number of policy questions, but he was also very critical of President Trump with the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. He criticized those Republicans who voted not to certify President Biden's election in the Electoral College. And while he did not vote to impeach President Trump, he did say that President Trump's conduct on January 6th was, in fact, impeachable. He just thought that the time had sort of run out for that. So I don't think Chip Roy really sort of represents where the most conservative members of the Republican caucus are headed these days. Others in the Freedom Caucus haven't spoken out yet. They may, but so far they haven't. So even for, most members of the Freedom Caucus,
the Fulton County District Attorney is holding a news conference about charges in the shootings at 2 spas in Atlanta back in March. A suspect is accused of killing 8 people, including 6 women of Asian descent. Let's listen in.
Specifically, the indictment charges Mr. Long with 4 counts of malice murder and 4 counts of felony murder. These are charges in the alternative. For the deaths of Hyun Chung Grant, Soon Chung Park, Soon Cha Kim, and Young A.U. Further, the indictment charges 5 counts of aggravated assault, with 4 of the counts being for the acts committed in the murder charges, plus 1 count for the defendant's alleged acts against Isis Escobar, who survived. Further, this indictment contains 1 count of domestic terrorism, arising from the allegation that the defendant committed the crime of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon when used against these 5 people was intended to intimidate or kill the civilian population. Further, the indictment carries 5 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. I, along with my staff, have made a determination that this office will seek the death penalty. Last year, I told the voters of Fulton County that I could not imagine a circumstance where I would seek it. And at that time, I did not. Unfortunately, a case has arisen in the first few months of my term that I believe warrants the ultimate penalty, and we shall seek it. Further, we have filed a notice that we will seek sentence enhancement pursuant to Georgia's sentencing enhancement statute, commonly referred to as a hate crime statute, based on the race and gender of the victims. This is the first time that the statute has been used in Fulton County, and it is my belief in the state. I am here with the team that I chose to seek an indictment in this case and move us one step closer to justice. Executive District Attorney Michael Carlson, Deputy District Attorney Adrian Love, Chief Senior District Attorney Adam Abadi, and Chief Senior District Attorney Kevin Armstrong. All of these members of my staff have extensive prosecutorial experience in major felonies, including capital cases. I have put some of the most experienced and best attorneys on this case because it is important to every member of our community. They have been closely working with Detective DeMeester of the Atlanta Police Department and other law enforcement agencies in this state who investigated the case that we put to these grand jurors. Before I close, let me make a couple more important points. First, the defendant in this case, as in all cases, is presumed innocent. The counts in the indictment are allegations at this stage, and it is incumbent upon my office to prove them to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. Second, the charges we have brought in this case, as well as seeking the death penalty and sentence enhancement based on alleged motivation by bias and or prejudice, send a message that everyone within this community is valued. We are all equal before the law, whether a victim or a defendant, and this office will work tirelessly every day to uphold that ideal. This prosecution is part of that effort. With that, I am happy to take questions, but please understand that I cannot discuss the specifics of the case beyond explaining what is in the indictment and the notices that we have filed.
The case has not been sent to a grand jury in Cherokee County. What message does this announcement send to that county?
I am actually uncertain as to whether if the grand jury there has sent it or not sent it. I do know that the grand jurors in that county meet twice a month, whereas we have a grand jury that meets 4 times a week.
What can you talk about? What was the turning point for you for wanting to seek the death penalty?
What I can tell you is that most people know I am a trial lawyer. I've been at this for 25 years. Some would say I'm still too active in the prosecution of cases. I have personally reviewed the statement in this case. I have personally walked the crime scene in these cases along with Chief Senior ADA Adam Abadi. I have spent more than 6 hours with the families involved in this case. We have reviewed the evidence, and I am comfortable in the decision that this is an appropriate sentence to seek. Yes, sir.
Can you please walk us through the next steps in this case? What we're likely to see happen next?
So the case will be calendared to what's called a plea and arraignment calendar. At that time, the defendant will have counsel present. He will make a formal announcement as to how he chooses to plead to this indictment and be read the counts, just a standard procedure. And then that judge will likely schedule all next stages. As you know, in all cases of this nature, there will be many, many motions, and those things will start to be scheduled. Obviously, we will have to give the defense the discovery that we have collected, and things of that nature shall go on.
It's been a long time in Fulton County since somebody's tried a death penalty case here. In part, I think because of a natural antipathy toward death penalty convictions, or the juries naturally sending somebody to death from this county. How will you overcome that, or am I making presumptions about what you're going to find?
This county has given the death penalty, so I think that there is some myths about what our juries will and will not do, and how serious the people in this community take violence. So I do think that it is a sentence that will be considered, but we obviously believe we can do it with the nature of the evidence in this case and presenting it honestly and fairly to a jury.
Clearly, the eyes of the nation are watching this case in particular, especially with all the victims who are involved. What message are you also trying to send by putting these charges toward that system?
The message that I am trying to send, the message that this office is trying to send, is the bedrock of what I believe this office stands for, is that Lady Justice in this community is blind. And if you harm any member of our community, you are going to be held accountable. And so the message that I hope that we are sending is, it does not matter your ethnicity. It does not matter what side of the tracks you come from. It does not matter your wealth. You will be treated as an individual with value.
If I could follow up.
Yes, sir.
You can't talk about the specifics of this case, but have your investigators been able to talk with the suspect and do an interview with him to figure out what his motivations may have been?
The suspect gave a lengthy statement to both the law enforcement in Cherokee County as well as Detective DeMeester here of the Atlanta Police Department. So we have been able to review that.
What do you foresee being the biggest hurdle for this trial?
Death penalty cases are never easy. This is a long journey. And so the biggest hurdle will just be having stamina, but some journeys are worth taking.
So the enhancement that the hate crimes statute, if it's a death penalty case and there's a death penalty conviction and a death penalty sentence, then the enhancement itself probably isn't going to do much. What is there? It looks like you want to validate the statute through this prosecution. Is that fair?
I think that the statute was validated when the legislature passed it. What I am doing as a prosecutor is using a tool where I think it is appropriate. And I think the facts and the nature of this case made it appropriate to file for that enhancement.
Ma'am, you've been in office a fairly short time. Were you hoping maybe for a little longer honeymoon?
Well, my honeymoon ended, as many of you know, on day one. So we're just doing the best we can and working through all of the issues. But I could not tell you how pleased I am with my office, how pleased things are coming together, and how hard we are working. I am committed to a standard of excellence, and failure is not an option.
That's actually a good question. Like, you've got a lot going on right now. How's your staffing looking right now?
We're bringing on people every day. I bring on 12 more employees tomorrow. We have a lot of interest in this office. We're getting some top candidates. I promised the voters when they elected me that I would bring on top talent. I think you see people that stand behind me and stand at other conferences that represent that I am holding true to that ideal. Luckily, because I have been around so long, a lot of lawyers know me. They know my integrity. They know my ethics. And if they come to apply here, they also know how hard I work and how hard I expect them to work. So we're moving forward. Yes, sir.
Would you be able to give us an update on the Trump investigation, please?
The Trump investigation is underway, and I won't comment further than that. Well, we really appreciate your time. We appreciate the interest that you have in this. We think it is important for our entire community, and we just thank you for being here with us today. Thank you so much.
It's a good time for people like us. Everything's starting up.
This is not just another streaming app.
You might want to hold on to something.
This is a mountain of original, bingeable entertainment.
It's just the beginning. The world is now a blank page.
That's why we're here, to save each other.
This is chilling, unsettling, and brilliantly bonkers.
Oh, shh.
This is weird and hilarious, stylish and cheeky.
I imagine she dreams of casting me aside like an old Jew.
Oh, honey, you know I'd never throw away a shoe.
This is a joy to watch, a wonder to explore, and a peak TV experience.
We are such stuff as dreams are made on.
I'm so happy! Yay!
Live sports, breaking news, and a mountain of entertainment. Paramount Plus, now streaming.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. Data shows confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the U.S. are moving in the right direction, but rates of vaccination are declining. According to Johns Hopkins, daily infections fell below 40,000 Monday for the first time since September. Yet in the last week, 2 million vaccine doses were administered per day. That is down from a high of nearly 3.5 million in March. On Tuesday, President Biden met virtually with 6 Democratic and Republican governors to discuss changing distribution plans. Journalists were not allowed in the room. It comes after some governors criticized Mr. Biden's absence on weekly pandemic response conference calls. The administration is also monitoring a ransomware attack that crippled a major fuel supply line. The Colonial pipeline runs along the East Coast. The Biden administration says it's working on contingency plans to move fuel if it's not up and running by the weekend.
These states who are impacted, even with the turning on of the pipeline system, they still may feel a supply crunch as Colonial fully resumes. So, but the American people can feel assured that this administration is working with the company to get it resumed as soon as possible.
We'll have more on that in a moment, but first, the Senate Rules Committee is debating a bill that could significantly change the U.S. election system. Democrats want to bring S1, also known as the For the People Act, up for a vote. A version of the bill already passed the House in March. Senate Republicans claim it's federal overreach and say they want to add some 100 amendments to it. Here's Minority Leader Mitch McConnell earlier.
The Democratic Party, on its own, wants to rewrite the ground rules of American politics for their benefit. We all know that's what this is about. It's hard to imagine anything that would erode public confidence in our democracy more drastically. This bill has purely partisan support in the House. It had bipartisan opposition. It's one thing to make fiscal policy that way, to use reconciliation to tax and to spend. It's very different to try to hotwire our democracy itself without a single vote from the other side.
Democrats are under pressure to use their razor-thin majorities in Congress to pass legislative priorities while they still can. The president is asking for a police reform package on his desk by May 25th, but early indications show that's unlikely to happen. Plus, the White House is looking for significant progress on its massive jobs and infrastructure plan by Memorial Day. For more on all of this, let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns, Mariana Sotomayor, and Natasha Korecki. Caitlin is CBSN's Washington reporter. Mariana is a congressional reporter at The Washington Post. And Natasha is a Politico White House correspondent. Welcome to you all. Natasha, let me begin with you. The president has made several public bids for bipartisanship on his infrastructure proposals. Has anything come of these meetings with Republicans, and does he risk alienating his own party?
Well, there are already, to answer the second part of your question, there are already some, hiccups along the way with progressives a little worried here about these overtures to Republicans by Biden. But, the White House is urging patience. There's a lot of different tactics they can use right now and paths they can use. They're going to have another bite at the apple through reconciliation, the White House believes. With Republicans so far, the big meeting is going to happen tomorrow and Thursday when you have, the leadership coming into the White House. And then you also have Senator Capito and some other senators coming into the White House. I would say that from sources, they've all been saying this Capito compromise is the real deal. She is really negotiating in good faith, and the White House believes that if they can really get her and others to move on board, they're going to be able to expand that to other Republicans. Because after all, these are projects they're offering in all of these senators' different districts. They also see McConnell's recent comments on Sunday saying, well, maybe we can up this to $800 billion for infrastructure. They see that as a sign that he's willing to negotiate. So a lot of cynicism on the Hill and and of course in the White House, just as far as can they actually make this happen? But, right now they're at the early stages and they're feeling pretty confident that they can get somewhere with this.
Meantime, Caitlin, on another topic, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell vowed to block Democrats' For the People Act. What does the act do, and why is it controversial for several Republicans and also some Democrats?
That's right. And McConnell's presence at the Rules Committee markup of this bill earlier today was really remarkable because it shows how big of an issue this is on the Republican side. And Majority Leader Chuck Schumer was also present and shows how big of a deal this is for Democrats as well. Republicans largely object to this from a policy perspective because they believe that it is a federal takeover of elections. They think that they disagree with some of the provisions that would provide public public financing for elections, and many other proposals that even some election officials have said that might put some burdens on local and state officials. But more broadly speaking, this, of course, is coming in reaction or after we've seen Republicans at the state level move to change voting laws in the wake of the 2020 election. And undergirding all of this is the former President Trump, continuing to make fraudulent, baseless claims about the election, and that's really fueling the base of the party to push forward with election reforms at the state level. And according to our own polling, CBS polling, about 70% of Republicans say that Biden did not legitimately win the election. So those are kind of the dynamics on the Republican side, but they also are opposed to this from a policy level. And Democrats, meanwhile, say that this is why this kind of legislation is needed, that the baseline needs to be established for voter protections. However, they've come under some criticism as well, including from some local officials across the country who say that some of these deadlines and targets and timelines are just really burdensome for local officials. So Democrats moved some amendments today, or tried to address some of those concerns. But there's also this bigger challenge facing Democrats, which is that they are not all united on this bill. I mean, today's markup really showed that they're not going to get any Republican support for this, but they also haven't shored up the Democrats on this as well. Joe Manchin, of course, remains the single outlier on this bill. He said he is not yet supportive of it and is concerned about a partisan election bill being put forth. And this is why you've seen a lot of activists try to push to reform Senate rules to be able to pass this kind of bill. But again, support for filibuster reform is also elusive on Capitol Hill, with Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona also opposing it. So while this bill may make it out of the markup, may make it out of committee, it still faces a very uphill climb here in the Senate and raises questions about how Democrats need to strategize next and perhaps have a more targeted approach to these voting issues.
Natasha, back on infrastructure for a moment. If the White House compromises with Republicans on infrastructure, do we have an idea of what is on the chopping block potentially?
Well, what White House has said is that they're, behind the scenes, they're saying they're really focusing this aspect of the negotiations on hard infrastructure. Now, of course, there's this whole other part of the bigger, more massive infrastructure plan that Biden wants, and that includes the so-called soft infrastructure, the child care, some of the elder care, education-related, benefits and so forth, that the White House is recognizing Republicans are not going to sign on to that. So they are looking at this as that is a separate negotiation. So far, they don't see a lot as on the chopping block because they're looking at this as two separate. They're separating the two. One, hard infrastructure to do with Republicans. The other part, they might have to do through, likely would have to do through reconciliation. And I think that's why you're seeing the White House bring in Joe Manchin and bring in Kyrsten Sinema right now. They're trying to get them signed on early on to this bipartisan infrastructure bill. If that falls apart with Republicans, then they can come back and say, look, we did everything we can. We need you now. We need to work with progressives, and we need to get this across the goal line for the more larger, the families plan and the jobs plan is really the two different infrastructure, bills or packages that they're talking about. But really, the White House recognizes what they're working with Republicans, and they know it's a no-go if they try to go anywhere. They might do some negotiations on this infrastructure bill and say, hey, well, how about lead pipes? Can we talk about that? How about electrical grids? Can we talk about that? And try to expand it some. But they really know that this whole care economy that they've been talking about, some of these other benefits in the families plan, that's going to have to most likely be Democrats only.
Mariana, I want to ask you about the story that we've continued to cover here on Red and Blue for several days now. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy made public what he said on a hot mic days earlier. He wants Congresswoman Liz Cheney gone from her leadership post. Now, she won a resounding majority in a secret vote just 2 months ago. What do her prospects look like now, and what are you hearing from people there on Capitol Hill?
Well, Elaine, there's no saving Liz Cheney at this point. Of course, this vote is going to happen tomorrow. It is also going to be a closed vote, so we won't know exactly which Republicans voted in which way. But what we do know is that a majority of the caucus is no longer backing her. We've heard from some members who did end up voting to keep her in leadership actually now say they're not going to do that. One of them actually being one of the 10 Republicans who did vote to impeach Trump. It's Congressman John Katko from New York. He's going to be backing fellow New Yorker Elise Stefanik, who is likely to be replacing Cheney, potentially in a vote that could happen as early as tomorrow, but also as late as next week. But all signs point to her not going to be able to stay as the third ranking, the highest ranking Republican in the House.